Mother Knows Death presents External Exams with Nicole and Jemmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mother Knows Death. On this week's external exam, we will be speaking with Matt Murphy. Matt is a former homicide prosecutor who spent more than 2 decades assigned to the sexual assault and homicide units of the Orange County District Attorney's Office. Now he regularly appears on national television shows. You may have seen him on 2020, Good Morning America, or I Crime with Elizabeth Vargas, where he discusses murder cases across the country. Today, I'll talk to Matt about some of the cases he's worked on, other homicide cases we have been following on Mother Knows Death podcast, and also about his new book, The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death, which is available now. Please welcome Matt Murphy to the show. Hi, Matt. Thanks for being here today.
Happy to be here.
I have a funny story to tell you, actually, that this is the first time I met you, but I have a story involving you. So you guys know, and I don't know if you know this, but I went to CrimeCon too. It was my first year at CrimeCon, and I had a lecture, and I was so nervous getting ready to go to the lecture, and I was walking up that little hallway where they bring you into the back, and they're showing you what room you're going to go sit in and wait to go into your lecture. And as I was walking up there was this trail of women that were holding like little notepads, and they were walking and following some guy, right? And then my husband was like, all right, that guy has to be doing a lecture or something because these girls are like fanning out hard over this guy. And it turns out that it was you. And they were like Beatles fans. It was insane. And one thing, my husband picked up from being there was just like, yo, this is like, if you want to meet a girl, like there's there's a lot of women here. It is 6,000 people or something. But he was just like, I can't believe how many women are here. So it's just a funny story.
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah, the crowds. Like I did Vegas. They asked me to do a no body presentation. So I've prosecuted 5 no body murders, right? And I guess they're relatively rare still. So I thought like 40 people would show up for my little horse and pony show, with my PowerPoint, and I think there was 2,000 people in the room.
Oh, wow.
And I walk out onto the stage, and I'm like, this is like the biggest jury I've ever seen. But everybody's so nice, and the crowds are great. But yeah, as far as meeting women, I'm at those things. I retreat back up to my room. I don't hang out on the bar. I don't do any of that. I go back and eat room service and usually work on whatever legal stuff I got going on for my law practice. So
yeah, I get that. The whole experience was like very overwhelming for me, and the same exact thing. I was like, I don't really want to eat in a restaurant right now. Like, let's just get room service and turn it off. It's like overstimulation.
yeah, it's really, yeah. And a lot of the places like Vegas is overstimulating in its own right. And then, but the people are so nice. And one of the things let's see, I went to, as part of ABC, I went in 2019, then COVID. So in Vegas, Orlando. So I've done 4, and they are. I kind of came to the conclusion that most of the people that come there they're really sort of victim oriented. You know what I mean? Like they're very sympathetic towards the victims. They're supportive of the police. They seem to be from my point of view, their heads are in the right place. You know what I mean? Like they kind of want to help, and they want to learn, and they want to learn. They want to learn legal concepts, and they want to learn forensic stuff, and they want to hear interesting stories. And, I haven't had a bad experience yet with anybody in the crowds.
Yeah, I think it's cool because a lot of people, for whatever their life circumstances are, they don't have the opportunity to go to school for that. Maybe it's like they had kids or whatever. They just never did it, but they have so much interest in it that they're actually trying to learn as if they were going to school for it or doing it as a job. So I think it was just really awesome. And there's just so many different, like I do autopsy stuff and you do the prosecutor stuff. It's really cool. There's a mix of every little job within the field of forensics, and it's super cool.
Yeah. And let's face it, it is fascinating. I'm still fascinated by it. I did it for 21 years in sex and homicide, and I'm still, if I'm home on a Friday night and I'm just flipping through channels, I will find myself getting hooked over and over again. And even on Dateline or 48 Hours, they're the competition with ABC, so don't tell anybody at ABC. But yeah, I can get sucked into a good true crime show. One I really thought was amazing was, did you ever see Don't F with Cats? Where people
No.
salute. Oh, that's it. Everybody's got to watch that. It is amazing. It's basically, I don't almost don't even want to give anything away, but essentially, it's this guy posts himself killing cats online, and he's basically anonymous online, and a bunch of online sleuths put together. They go on a hunt for who this guy is, figuring that anybody that would kill cats very correctly might kill people. And I don't even want to give anything away. It is amazing. So it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I am interested in that. And the online sleuth community is very interesting how they're sometimes assisting with people, investigators trying to solve crimes. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah, and that case is a great example of that. And sometimes, the an online push can also sort of shame different jurisdictions into actually putting some resources into cold cases, which can be good. But they also, there's downsides to it too. Like on Kohberger, there was a couple online sleuths that decided that some professor committed that murder, and the guy was totally innocent, and that can be, I guess, the downside of it. But I guess as a society, we're still all collectively kind of figuring out this whole social media thing.
So a couple days ago, there was a story in the news where this surgeon had taken out a guy's liver by accident. He went in to get his spleen removed and he took out the wrong organ. And I was like, I mean, trying to not sound insensitive, but I'm kind of jealous of the person that got to do that autopsy because it is a very fascinating autopsy for me. Do you ever watch any of these shows and think, God, I wish I could be involved in prosecuting this case? It's just so interesting.
That's a great question, and the answer is a yes. I did this for a long time, and I it was really, life wise and work wise, it was a good time for me to go. And ABC offered me a great deal, and the longest anybody had ever done before me in the homicide unit of Orange County was 15 years, and that was a guy who spent half of it as a manager. So he's a buddy of mine. So I was give him a hard time. It doesn't count because I was a line prosecutor for 17. But truth is, I miss it every day. And so when I'm brought in on some of these cases, like Kohberger's one, like I'm almost like that cat looking at birds on the other side of the window. Like, like I want to jump in the screen. I want to go do my thing. And the same thing happens even when I live in Los Angeles, and I split time between here and New York City. And a couple of times in New York and a couple of times in LA, I've driven past crime scenes with the yellow tape, and that's what I used to do. I used to roll up with my investigator, and I want to go in and help work the case. So yeah, I think about that all the time either when I'm watching something or when I'm doing commentary on a case, or sometimes I'll even see the prosecution do something that I just want to scream, like, what are you guys thinking? But, then I get back into it. Remember, it's not my case, not my job. And I don't have to lose any sleep over it that night. So
You sound like my husband. Like he's a fireman and he's getting ready to get promoted to a higher position where he won't be going into fires anymore, and it's like ruining his life thinking about that,
yeah.
which is outrageous. But speaking of, so let's get into, since you brought up the Bryan Kohberger Idaho College student murder case, I want to talk about that because, I've seen murder victims. I've been talking about this for years and, being involved in autopsies of people that were murdered and stuff. And like, it's whatever. I'll talk about it at dinner. I'll eat lunch talking. It doesn't bother me. But for some reason, this one really, really bothered me. And when he got arrested and I saw his picture, like his face scared the shit out of me for real. Like, there's something so eerie about him. Have you ever prosecuted or worked on a case where someone just was beyond? I mean, I know you worked with a lot of murderers, but somebody that just was like extra creepy. And do you feel the same kind of way about this case with Bryan Kohberger?
Um, yes. And did you see the clip when he got pulled over on the highway when he's driving cross country with his
Yes.
dad, and the look in his eyes, like, am I getting arrested right now? And
Oh my God,
yeah,
it gives me the chills. His eyes are so scary to me.
yep. Now you've got very good instincts, I think. The look the in the dating game killer Rodney Alcala, a lot of serial killers, and this is an interesting thing. There's almost this pattern that they follow. They love to collect trophies from their victims. That's one of the things they love to do. And when it comes to court, they're all drawn towards representing themselves. And it's a fascinating thing. And in California, we call that pro per. So when they go pro per and they'll fire their attorneys, and I think it's a combination of sort of the arrogance of every good psychopath. They believe that they're the smartest person in the room. And then I also think it's that they cannot resist the control. So, like you have the power of an attorney. You have the ability to call witnesses. You have the ability to, force them to answer questions. Like, I think that somehow that calls to that psychopath, the serial killer. So a lot of those guys go pro per. And I had a guy named Douglas Hopper who was a serial rapist. And the difference between serial rapists who don't kill and serial murderers who rape their victims is virtually nothing. I mean, it is the same personality type. They do the exact same thing. Just one type gets off on the killing and the other doesn't usually go that far. You know what I mean? But it's kind of the same guy over and over again. And so they represent themselves and you have to talk to them and deal with them like they're a lawyer. And like Rodney Alcala murdered 100 people probably. And that guy, we had him there's 5 that we know for sure, 5 or 6 in New York. There's 13 cases out in the Western United States that we know for sure he did. And then there's just a host of other opportunities and ones where he's a suspect. We prosecuted him for 4 in LA County and 1 in Orange County. And we did those together. But that guy represented himself, and I had to deal with him every day, go in and face to face, have conversations with him. And it was, my co-counsel was sort of appalled at the idea, and she was wonderful. But she's like, once he went pro per, she's like, well, now what do we do? And we came up with a plan where it's like, look, we'll do good cop, bad cop. I'll be his buddy. And every time we have to tell him no on some crazy thing he wants to do, I'll just blame you. And we'll take advantage of whatever hatred he has of women or whatever he's got going on that's making him do all this. And it actually worked very well. Like it allowed us, I could treat him professionally, and you have to be fair, and you have to make sure that you're treating even a psycho killer that's representing himself. You got to make sure that the process is fair. You got to make sure that you get him the stuff that he wants to a degree. And then beyond that, when he wants to do really crazy stuff, you have to tell him no, and you have to tell him no a lot. But yeah, that was a very interesting experience because basically I got to get to know these guys. You've got to like develop a little bit of a rapport to move the case along and the trial along. And it's yeah. So some of them you can look in their eyes and But what's fascinating about serial killers also is a lot of these guys could be standing in line in front of us at a Starbucks and we wouldn't know, and sometimes our instincts just, like Rodney Alcala won the dating game, which is while he's killing everybody, he goes on the dating game and wins it. And you could see the charm and the jokes and the humor, and she picked him. So it's like, on one hand, he was giving up no tells, but then he came behind the screen and she saw him, and you can see it. She immediately thought something's not right, and she refused to go on the date. So it's like, it's interesting when that instinct sort of kicks in and what it's based on. In fact, Anna Kendrick has a movie coming out called Woman of the Hour on Netflix. I don't know when the release date is, but where it's her first movie she's ever directed. And I got to consult a little bit on that. And she couldn't be nicer, by the way. But yeah, it's a really interesting question, right? Like where do our instincts let us down with people like that?
I would love to interview that lady, find whoever that was on that show, and just be like, why didn't you end up going on the date with this guy? What was it? And
Right.
I mean, obviously she probably knows what happened after that,
Oh yeah. Yeah,
That's
she passed
really
away a few
interesting.
years ago. But yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? Like, what was it? What made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up about this guy? Maybe I shouldn't say that about a woman. Um, but maybe whatever
Well,
creeped you out.
yeah.
I don't mean to imply she had a hairy back, but
Everyone has a little bit of hair on their body, it's fine.
okay.
Um, so speaking of being, like, fair, so with the Bryan Kohberger case right now, a judge just ruled this week that it was not going to take place in the county where the murder happened now because they're I guess the defense did some kind of survey on the people that live in the town and asking them what they thought about this case, and some of the quotes were, "There will likely be a riot and he wouldn't last long outside because someone would do the good old boy justice on him." And another person said that they would burn the courthouse down if he got acquitted of this murder. So they're thinking, okay, they can't prosecute the case in this county because it's not going to be fair to him. And honestly, it kind of worries me a little bit because I know that you're really involved in this case and I'm really involved in this case, but if I'm just at a party and people say like, "What's the craziest thing you're talking about right now?" and I bring it up, so many people are like, "Oh, I didn't even hear about that." And I'm
Right.
like, "What?" So,
Yeah.
do you think that this is going to be a bad thing for the prosecution that it's moving?
No, no. And also, yeah, I read the motions on that case, and what we're talking about is capital case litigation. Okay, so in other words, death penalty, and unlike California, Idaho actually has a functioning death penalty. I think they only have 7 people on death row there, but they may actually execute in the state of Idaho. So. Idaho's part of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal federally. So the way it goes is it automatically gets procedurally sent to the Idaho Supreme Court, and they'll review the issues on the case if there's a conviction and if there's a death sentence. Okay, and then it goes to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit historically has been somewhat hostile to death penalty cases. So the name of the game for the prosecution and for the judge is to eliminate all appellate issues to the greatest degree that you can. And I thought that the people that would say something like that, if in fact they actually existed, and I have some question marks about that. Like the defense in a death penalty case did a survey. You can almost like just take the tablespoonful of salt and take a hit right there. In most issues, like, hey, we did a survey and everybody said nobody can be fair. Like that's what you encounter all the time when you do capital case litigation. And the defense has to basically go to the mat on every single issue. So I think the judge, by doing that, the call was it was a conservative call. It was a safe call. And I think it was the right one because the goal is you don't want the case to get reversed. So the families have to go through it a second time. So by agreeing to move it, the judge is eliminating that issue on appellate review because the prosecution has no ability to appeal. Once there's a conviction, you can't appeal an acquittal, for example. In certain countries, you can't in the United States. So that was the right call. Very, very safe call. In Orange County, just as an example, with a much larger population, there's never been a change of any motion granted in the history of the county based on pretrial publicity. So safe call. They probably would have been fine if they let it stay where it was. But to your point, where you said that you're shocked how few people have heard about it. That's the way every big high-profile case you do is as a prosecutor. You do jury questionnaires. The judge sends those out, and you can have some case where you think the entire world is watching, and and I've done some high-profile stuff, and you'll have a venire, which is a group of jurors who show up, and you'll give them the questionnaires, and one of the questions is always, have you heard about this case? Have you read anything about this case? If so, can you put that aside? And it is always shocking to me, like 80% of the people in the county with all kinds of splashy headlines won't even have heard of it. And of the 20% that have, half of those would be like, yeah, I heard something about like a school, or was there a boat involved? Like they don't know. And then of the 10% that have actually been following, most of those could even say, yeah, I read some articles on it. I can't really remember what they said, but I can absolutely put that aside. I know that's media. I'm going to base my decision on the evidence and the law. So you got to kick about 5%, believe it or not. So they could have done that in that county. They could have found a fair jury. There's no doubt in my mind they could have, but the judge wanted to be careful. So it's the right call. It's better for the families and everybody else.
Do you think so let's talk about crime scenes and stuff because obviously you've been on a ton of them and that particular scene was probably really horrible for investigators to go on, especially because it's not like they're in, Philadelphia where they see like really bad stuff all the time. It's like they probably there wasn't even a murder there for years prior to this, and it was probably a lot for them to see that with young kids and everything like that. Do you remember your first homicide scene that you went to?
Yeah. I mean, I remember every detail, I think, of every homicide scene I ever went to, including some of the smells. That's one of those things that when you walk into a murder scene, it is so intense, and you're there to observe and absorb and see. And my first homicide scene, I talk about this in my book. Um, I was getting over a breakup at the time. I thought I was going to get married. I was 33, and we broke up, and we've been together for 5 years, and she really wanted to get married, and I wasn't ready yet. It was one of those things. And
Oh, I know that story. I went through that story with my
yeah,
husband.
I think a lot of people have. It's like I just wasn't ready, and she was, and so we broke up. And I figured, it was going to be like every other relationship like that. We get back together, and then we wind up getting married. And instead, and she was a very smart, beautiful, high quality person, and there were guys knocking her door down to get to her, and she wound up meeting a guy that she fell in love with, and wound up marrying him and had kids, and she's
Oh
happily
god.
married today. So I'm that country song fool, right when I got moved into the homicide unit, and I started out just like I started this morning. I started in the water, just sitting out there trying to like work it out in my head, and my phone when I got back to the parking lot, changing back into my car on my way to work. And it was my first week in homicide, and I got my very first call out, and it was a murder in Newport Beach. And I didn't know my detectives yet. I'd just gotten assigned that city. I'd been in the unit a couple of days, and I went down. I looked like I was 12, and I talked myself past the perimeter tape, and they walk me in. And and you're there as a prosecutor, not to lead the investigation, but to assist, and to help with the warrants and anything the police might need. And Orange County, it's a vertical system. So the way it works is I would go when the murder happened that day or that night with my investigator. And then once we file charges, you go all the way up, and then I handle everything in court. And the lead detective who I meet there at the murder scene is there with me with every court appearance and through the trial, sitting next to me. So it's a team concept. I think every DA's office should do it that way, and it works very, very well. But I walked in, and like the TV shows, what is that one scene over and over again when the rookie shows up on a scene, right? Like, and we've all seen it.
It
It's like
goes
a
in the
TV
corner and throws up.
Right. And you've seen it, or doesn't make it to the corner, right? Like the old Quincy episodes that he did that. And I'm driving down there, and I went to one funeral at this point in my life, and I saw a woman get hit by a bus. So I think this is gonna be the third dead body I've ever seen in my life. And the whole way down from Manhattan Beach to Orange County, I'm thinking, Murphy, in the name of all things holy, just don't puke. And I walk in with the detective who was there. His name is Dave Byington, and he is, in my mind, the guy is a superhero. And this is the first day I met him, and I wound up working together with him on some of the biggest cases that I did, including the Hawks murder case. So this is basically meeting somebody that's going to be one of my best friends for life. And I walk in, and he walks me in, and this guy's on the floor on his back. Okay. And I'm trying to, I've got the biggest imposter syndrome ever. and I don't know what I'm doing as far as murders go at all. And I'm just thinking, don't throw up on the body. You'll never live it down. Whatever you do, don't throw up on the body. And I look down, and the first thing I see is he's got a wallet chain into his right back pocket, and he had a folding knife in his left hand, and he was full of bullet holes. And it immediately struck me. It's like, well, why would a left-handed person keep their wallet in their right pocket? And why would, or in the alternative, why would a right-handed person have a knife in his left hand? And it just struck me instantly. And it was like, and that's why they encouraged us to go to the crime scenes, because immediately it was like, don't puke, don't puke, don't puke. That makes no effing sense, and then and I'm there for that. And it turns out it was this, she was a financial planner, I think. And he, actually this is this is the intro to my book. So I guess I'm not spoiling anything by sharing this, but basically I walk in, and they take me upstairs. There's a blood smear on the wall, like semicircular on the wall of this staircase. He's in the kitchen, but it's at the bottom of a staircase, kind of, and it's this wooden floor. And the detective takes me upstairs. There's broken glass. There's rose petals leading to a bed. There's candles burning all over the place. Like there's some sort of romantic interlude that's been interrupted. And there's a couple of bullet holes upstairs, and he has 2 shots in his chest. And when the detective moved him, and the body actually groaned, which was, not supposed to happen in my brain. The guy's like, oh, and because he was forcing the air out of the lungs, and it was like, I'm thinking he's alive, and I didn't say anything, of course, but he was moving it to show me that 2 of the bullet wounds in the chest actually went right through him, and the expended bullets went all the way through the body and were in the hardwood flooring, meaning he was on his back and the gun was pressed against him twice. There's one in his mouth, one in his temple, and one in his back. And so it turns out the woman who lived there with another man that she'd just broken up with. They'd been together like 10 years. She was, I think, 42 years old. And her previous boyfriend, he'd been cheating on her with another man. And so they had broken up, but they were still living together. So her life was kind of upside down. And she started seeing our victim, who was separated from his wife at the time. And he went over to break up with her too. So that was too much for her to take. So she kills him. And it was a 6-shot revolver, but there was 9 bullet holes, meaning that she'd reloaded the gun, which from a legal perspective is very significant because that turns it into a first-degree murder. She winds up bailing out because there's no, she wasn't a flight risk. She had ties to the community. She had no criminal history. So under all of the statutory criteria, she was qualified for bail. She gets out and meets up with her gay ex-boyfriend, who, this is like the next day. And this is my very first week in homicide. They're having a talk. He's staying in a hotel because we were still processing the crime scene. And so they couldn't even go back to the house. So this is right after her release. He lets her into his hotel room. They talk for a while. He falls asleep. She bludgeons him to death with a tire iron she brought in from her car. And then she drives to a place called the Firing Line in Huntington Beach, rents a gun, and blows her brains out. And that was, I think, my 5th day in the homicide unit. And my boss, Lou Rosenblum, who was wonderful, I go in and I'm like, completely wide-eyed, like, what goes on in this unit? And he just kind of laughed, and he said, if you think that's crazy, just you wait. So that was my first homicide scene, crazy case. And that was the first week of 17 years of weeks. And, I tell, I share a bunch of the crazy cases that I worked on in my book.
So you're in this scene, and I'm just thinking about how like gross you feel when you have like a really bad breakup. Because my husband and I went through the same exact thing. But we got back together because he saw the light, I guess. I don't know, but it was the same thing. Like, I'm ready to get married. You're not ready to get married, whatever. So I know like how intense that was. when you go on scenes like this, you sometimes, and you see these couples that just have these insane dramas and these love triangles and this and that, and think like, okay, maybe my problems aren't so bad. They're killing each other, they're killing other people, killing themselves over this. And do you ever kind of look at other people's lives and what's happening and think like, maybe I'm just being over dramatic or something like that?
100%, 100%. And it's one of the most common types of cases that you deal with are exactly what you're just talking about. I mean, the bread and butter of the homicide unit, you have two things that you roll out to over and over again. Methamphetamine related murders, where somebody is either super tweaky and kills somebody because they're, you know, suffering from, psychotic breakdown because they've been up for 5 days, or it's a dope ripoff, or somebody's high. But really, the most common you deal with are domestic violence cases where a woman or a man, and a lot of times it is women, have murdered their spouse or their partner, and they, you go out and you walk into somebody's home, and that's probably the most common type you see. And yeah, it really does put it in perspective, because a lot of murders, and there's different kinds, of course. Like a child abuse death is a totally different kind of murder than like a Watson murder, which is a DUI murder, and that's totally different than a gang murder. And the taxonomy of murders is something I do talk about in the book. Like there's so different, and there's different considerations at trial for each one of those, or the investigations. And then you get into like conspiracies to commit murder for money and serial killers. But the most common type you see are those domestics that we can all relate to. And you can't really, I can't wrap my head around somebody that would freak out on a kid and abuse a child. Like it's nowhere in my lexicon, right? Same thing with gang murders. Like they're almost boring because it's somebody on the wrong street who gives a bad look. Like it's so banal and stupid. We can't relate to it. But when it comes to things like business partners in a dispute, or neighbors arguing over a fence, or a relationship where somebody cheats, we get a lot more into kind of a headspace where it's like, I've had a broken heart on a Saturday night. And, and it's not these, Chris Rock has a great routine where he's talking about OJ, and he's like, I'm not saying he should have done it, but I understand, and it's kind of it's sort of the same thing on those domestics. You understand that there's a dynamic, and clearly every one of those is in fact a toxic relationship. Otherwise somebody wouldn't be dead. But it's a lot more relatable, not in the sense that, that you justify, you sympathize at all because it's awful every time. But it's a lot closer to our own lives, and it's fascinating in that way. And, that job impacted, it impacts your life a lot. Like once I got into the unit, I had colleagues that were very dedicated and really good at it, and super good husbands and fathers and wives and all that. And then I didn't have the bandwidth. I was really bad. I was a bad boyfriend, during that time, because you get the call outs at 3 a.m, and the job, for me anyway, really impacted kind of my real life, but real life also impacts the job. And I had another quick story. I talk about this in the book a little bit, but I'll share with you. After that whole breakup with her, I stumbled out there, and like a lot of us, I walked into the worst relationship ever, with somebody that was of a very different moral character. And I think it was like a port on the storm sort of thing, and I was ignoring all the red flags. And fast forward about 8 or 9 months, this was my girlfriend. It was the worst relationship I've ever been in. And she takes me to a wedding, and I do a surf trip annually with a bunch of my buddies. And we go to Indonesia, and we do these surf charters where we'll go get on different boats, and you go surf for 10 days in Indonesia on a boat. And I got this crew of guys. We do it every year. I was skipping that year because I just got into homicide, and my girlfriend had a wedding of her friends that she wanted to take me to up in Napa. And we get up there, and she used to hook up with one of the groomsmen in college. And at 2 a.m, I go from the bar, and I'm walking down this hallway to the bathroom, and she was mad at me about whatever. And I pass this couple making out in the corner, and I double take, and it's my girlfriend making out with the guy that she
Oh
used
my
to hook
God.
up with in college. So it's like, that's an attention getter. And so I wind up going on, we were supposed to be up there for like 4 days. And obviously that ended my trip and that relationship. And so I went up hopping on this surf trip with my buddies that happened 3 days later. And I wind up, it was last minute change. There was still a spot. I fly to Indonesia, try to get away from all that. And I wound up meeting a captain on the boat that year named Gary Burns, who had he lived on boats his whole life. And he told me these stories about, these drug smugglers that he'd encountered over the years and like some of the adventures he had, living on the water, doing these surf charters. And I got home, and about 3 months later, Tom and Jackie Hawks went missing off their yacht in Newport Beach. And we did 2 completely different forensic workups on that boat. And for those of you who are familiar with the story, this is the Skylar Deon case, where he was a child actor who went out. He was going to buy their boat, which is this beautiful 55-foot Lean-Wa trawler called the Well Deserved. And they were selling it, and he was going to buy it. And they went out on a sea trial. And he came back in, and he submitted paperwork indicating the sale had taken place. It was notarized. There was a notary public who was interviewed, and he showed up with the paperwork and said, I bought the boat. I paid cash. Here's where I got it, blah, blah, blah. Here are all the witnesses who saw it. We do a forensic workup on the boat, and we had nothing. We had no blood. But nobody could find this couple, and nobody could find their car. So we had a story that seemed a little bit weird, but we had no evidence. And we were at a dead end probably 8 weeks after they disappeared. And I called Gary in Australia, and I'm like, dude, I think we've got a murder, but I don't, what should we be looking for here if we think a murder happened on a boat? And we did 2 forensic workups, once with the crime lab, once with Newport CSI, and we just had nothing. And without skipping a beat, Nicole, he goes, look for a missing anchor. He's like, if they were selling the boat, there should be a manifest. Count the anchors on the boat versus what they're selling. And sure enough, there was a missing anchor.
Wow.
And it wound up making all the difference in the world. So I think that's a very, very long, convoluted answer to your question. But if it hadn't been for my drunk, cheating girlfriend, I don't think I ever would have met Gary Burns, and I never would have made that call. And that was what brought their whole house of cards down in that case, because from that, I knew I had something I could point to a jury. And we arrested Skylar like a couple days later. And from that arrest, we got search warrants, and their whole house of cards fell down, and we were able to prosecute everybody involved in that conspiracy. So that's another story in my book.
It is cool because in the book you talk about how solving these crimes are like you walk into these scenes and it's like a 3-dimensional puzzle, and your job is to pay attention to all of these little details that you've been talking about. And I'm curious from a perspective of, I always, I have little kids, and I'm always kind of like, what are they going to grow up to be? Because they just have such different personalities and strengths and weaknesses. So when you were a kid, did you, like, looking back, I'm sure you weren't like 6 years old saying you wanted to be a prosecutor. What kind of traits did you have as a child that you think you could look back and say, like, oh, I've always been really good at this. This is helpful towards my job.
Well, you can tell by the sun damage. As a kid, all I wanted to do was go to the beach. But I, as a child, I was. There's a great line in The Princess Bride. Remember that movie?
Yes, it's one of my
where
favorites.
where Inigo Montoya comes in, and I can't remember the 6-fingered man, right? And he throws him, and he stabs him with a knife. He throws a knife across the room, and Inigo Montoya pulls it out, and he goes, "Are you still fighting? You have an overdeveloped sense of justice, and it's going to get you in trouble one day." And as a kid, I don't know what it was, but starting in about 4th grade, we had a boy named Danny Berman at my elementary school that used to get picked on a lot by we had a few bullies, but they really picked on Danny. And I was 10, and I don't know what came over me that day, and I'm Irish and Scottish, so I've got some Irish blood in me even as a 10-year-old. And I liked Danny, and I always felt sorry for him. And I walked over and I punched the bully right in the face, and then got descended on and learned the physical consequences of doing that with a much bigger kid. But in a way, that's really what you are as a prosecutor. You're a bully fighter. And when it comes to child molesters or rapists or murderers, what they are, when you boil it down to their most basic, they are. Can I swear? Can I swear on this
Yeah, of
thing?
course.
They're fucking bullies, is what they are. And there's a few exceptions to that. You know, some killings like Watson murders, the DUI killings, or sometimes you get a fight in a bar, or maybe it's more mutual combat. It turns into something worse. But by and large, people who kill other people are bullies at their worst. And so as a kid, for whatever reason, you talk about getting into trouble. I got in so much trouble at school, all through high school, fighting the bully. And a lot of times, you don't necessarily physically win all those fights, but I kept stepping into them anyway. And more of, I don't know, Irish blood than brains, perhaps. But it was kind of a natural, in a weird way. It always felt very natural as a DA for me, because I got to stick up for the guy that wasn't the strong one. That was kind of the person that was getting picked on, and that's what your very first day. That's kind of what you're dealing with stupid fights, or one guy picking a fight in misdemeanors, and then you go to juvenile, and the juvenile kids that are getting prosecuted are almost always the bullies. Gang members are bullies. So you keep almost like, it's almost like I got in that fight in fourth grade, and then I've gotten in that same fight over and over again, and then professionally, I keep getting in that same fight, and even doing some defense work, I defend police officers as a large part of my practice. And, again, you see, it's just, there's bullies out there. And that's, yeah, if there was one trait I think I could point to that was sort of a natural for me, that was it.
It's really cool because you've had this your whole life, and you've always wanted to stick up for things that you don't think is right. And I think a lot of times, even kids, they do see right from wrong and stuff, but they don't really have the courage to stand up and really do something about it. Whereas when you were a kid, you were like, no, like, this isn't right. You're picking on this kid and I'm going to go after him. So I think that's really cool.
Courage or stupidity. I don't know which. But yeah, that's just, I've been hardwired for that. Sometimes, I mean, look, I got in trouble in school doing that. I got suspended in high school, for doing that exact thing. And I've done some pro bono work, where I've represented victims of sexual assault against my former boss in Orange County, who was trying to dismiss a case. And, I went in and got in that fight, and it was, it's one that I think there's some bad blood there, between me and him, as a result of me trying to represent these women who were victims of sexual assault. And I don't know, it's life is, I think I would sleep better if I hadn't kind of jumped into that fray so many times. Maybe I need to get a little bit wiser in my older age, but yeah. Then again, I wouldn't have changed a thing, I think, in any of those fights that I jumped into, professionally or otherwise.
Another cool thing that you talk about in the book is you have this quote that says the methods of committing and solving these crimes have become far more sophisticated, but the fundamentals of why murders are committed have not changed in 200,000 years.
Yeah.
I think that that's really cool. I always talk about that with my job too, just because whatever organs and stuff I'm looking at today are the same organs that people were looking at thousands of years ago. But it's cool because there are certain things that change. Like you wouldn't see the changes that we see with obesity today, for example, thousands of years ago. So it's just kind of cool, the evolution of that. So obviously, I always think that it was way easier to get away with murder, right, back in the day when there wasn't DNA and there wasn't all of this stuff. Do you think that people are committing murder less now because they're afraid that they're going to get caught? Or do you think that murderers don't really even care about consequences like that?
Well, that is a great question. That's a great question. So, I think there's layers to that answer. One of them is I'm sure there on the East Coast you've been following the Gilgo Beach, the Rex Heuermann case,
Yeah.
right? So he represents, I think, the next generation of serial killers, which is the Dexter type serial killer, where they have all the urges and they want to do it, but they're going to do it in a way that they're going to try to defeat the forensic science. And you know all about this, but they made that case on mito DNA. They made it on hairs, which the numbers aren't 1 in 10 octillion. The numbers are more like 1 in 100 on, hairs, teeth, the mitochondrial bones. That's a much less precise science than nuclear DNA. And that's fascinating. So I think that it's a combination. I think we have less serial killers out right now. There's the same amount of people doing it, but I think they're caught much quicker. I think that we're catching them the first time a lot more often now, especially with DNA. So we're doing a better job of catching repeat sadistic lust murders, which is what I talk about in my book, which is what Dr. Von Ebbing coined it in the 1880s, around the era of Jack the Ripper. Sadistic lust murder, really, that's Ted Bundy, that's, Rodney Alcala, that's Jeffrey Dahmer. That's the real archetype of the serial killer. And I think we're catching those guys quicker. Now, California is making a hard left turn away from that and towards early release of those guys. And that's starting to happen in LA County with LADA George Gascon. It's madness here, what they're doing as far as releasing killers and child molesters and rapists from state prison. If people only knew how insane that was, but there's been almost no media on his policies and what he's doing essentially to help these guys, and he's helping them.
Well,
So
why? I know what you're talking about. I just don't understand what's the motive behind helping these people.
he's the former district attorney of San Francisco, George Gascon. He ran here in Los Angeles right after the summer of George Floyd. They let him run with a ballot designation of criminal justice reformer, which sounded great to everybody in the fall of 2020. And he got elected, and the first thing he did, so there's a thing called BPT lifer hearings, where this is a huge part of my job for 17 years. You actually send prosecutors. So when you have a life sentence usually doesn't mean a life sentence. A life sentence means you get a parole hearing after 15 years or 20 years or whatever the determinant sentence is. So in California, for example, for a second-degree murder, you get 15 years to life, but you get a parole hearing in 12 years. So human life, essentially, according to the California state legislature and DAs like George Gascon, is worth 12 years. So if you're murdered and there's no, particular enhancements on it, the killer gets out in 12 years. They get a parole hearing in 12 years. And what you do is for Orange County and San Diego County and every other county in the state, pretty much, certainly Sacramento County, they will send a representative with the file to go in there and explain to the Board of Prison Terms what the guy actually did, how the victims feel, and they're there to set the record straight, and they oppose the release of the rapist, the child molester, or the murderer. George Gascon's very first day, he issued an edict in Los Angeles County, which produces more inmates and more life sentences than any other county in the state of California, pretty much any other county in the United States outside of New York and maybe Cook County in Chicago, and immediately forbade his prosecutors from attending those anymore. So there was no prosecutorial representative opposing the release, and they've been released and paroled into these neighborhoods that these same people profess to care so much about. And these guys are getting out. Murderers are getting out in LA. They're getting out in California, and it's scary times. And so your question, do I think there's less murders? There have been way less murders with the advent of 1-strike laws, 3-strike laws. Those things work. They're widely misunderstood, but they work for public safety. And it's almost like we've been lulled into this false sense of security. And, I participated in a show on Hulu called City of Angels, City of Death. And it focused on the 1970s and 80s and how we had all these serial killers running around in Southern California then. Well, the glory days are coming back if these policies keep going towards early release. And they're trying to eliminate life without possibility of parole now in the state of California. There's a bill right now from the California State Senate making it so that you would have a maximum of 25 years if you commit up to 2 murders and you get released automatically. That is madness. And there's situational murders, and then there's murders where it's somebody that really means to do it, like the serial killers, and in that bill they're like, but not serial killers. What about all the serial killers? The definition is 2 or more over at different times. But what if the person gets caught at one murder and they have all the bells and whistles and have all the urges? They just don't technically qualify as a serial killer because we caught them after the first one. Are they going to get out? Because lock your doors if that becomes the case. So right now there are less murders in the state of California, but there are certain people like DA George Gascon who are literally doing everything they can to change that.
Does he think that is he doing I'm trying to figure out, like, why, like, is he doing this because he's trying to give these people, like, another chance at, like, reforming their life? Or, like, what's the motive behind not wanting to keep people like this behind bars? I don't It's just very confusing
What
as a
is
regular person.
Yeah, what is the motive behind the chant defund the police? Which is the dumbest thing. Having worked in law enforcement for 26 years, it's like that is the most moronic thing that has ever been chanted at a rally ever. I don't get it. It's like we're dealing with children. They haven't thought it through. And I've seen personally, like Rodney Alcala is a perfect example of this. Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, kidnapped and raped an 8-year-old girl in Hollywood in 1968. She was in a coma for 32 days and she survived. He fled to New York. He changed his name, where he committed at least 5 more murders for sure, but probably many more. They catch him several years later working at an all-girls sleepaway camp in Vermont. He gets extradited back to California. He's tried and he received a life sentence in 1971, right? Life sentence in the state of California. He goes in for his BPT, his board of prison terms parole hearing. He got the help that he needed. He got therapy, promised not to do it again, and they released that man after 34 months. And depending on the detective that you listen to, and the estimates, he murdered about 100 people after that. So we've got 5 for sure in Southern California, just in LA and Orange County. There's 1 in Marin. There's 2 more in San Diego, almost certainly. There was 1 that he was charged with in the state of Wyoming. There was 5 at least in New York, and he got permission to drive back and forth across the country at least twice, going through Texas, Wyoming, and he left a trail everywhere he went. That guy could have been kept in state prison for life, and they let him go. And that's what's going to happen when, like, there's a certain percentage of killers that cannot be rehabilitated. A lot of killings are situational, like that domestic violence case we were talking about, where that guy is probably never going to do it again, or that woman, she's never going to be in that same dispute with her neighbor over the fence, right? There's people that aren't going to reoffend. And then there's human predators like Rodney Alcala, like rapists, like child molesters, who once they cross the Rubicon and justify it in their own minds, there's no fixing them. All the therapy in the world does not end the compulsion. You can do chemical castration. It doesn't work. It's in the brain. And they will keep offending. I don't mean to end this interview on a bummer, but those guys are going to keep offending. And it's like we have forgotten it, and everybody's asleep right now, and we've forgotten how dangerous they are. And look, when those guys get out, like Rodney Alcala, innocent people are going to die. And that has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. That's a public safety thing that as communities, people need to understand. And I'm an independent politically. The only party I've ever belonged to is the Democratic Party here in California until I literally couldn't take it anymore. And I left and I became an independent. And this is not about politics. It's about kids. It's about people being able to walk home from school. It's about being able to walk out of your house to go to the market and not worry that some squatter is going to take it over, or some loony child molester in the time that you're gone. And I just saw a thing on Instagram yesterday from the neighborhood I grew up in West LA. 3 guys in masks lugging, looks like an 800-pound safe out of a house in West LA. And I literally, it's the door stuck, like it's 3 guys moving the safe, and it's they ran out of time on the reel. They had to skip to the end, and they get it into the car and they get away because there was nobody, 911 did not respond. That's Los Angeles now. And that's the future, unless people kind of wake up a little bit and remember that, how you vote matters, especially when it comes to local district attorneys. It matters a lot.
I feel like I'm really happy right now that I live on the total opposite side of of the country, although I think that it's happening in more areas than just California, unfortunately. Um, do you think that I mean, obviously, when there's no rules, you see it, like, people even just going and robbing Target or whatever. I mean, when you're not gonna get in trouble for shoplifting, people are gonna take advantage of that. I feel like the same thing might happen with the murder situation. I mean, I know a lot of them are impulsive things that you wouldn't drive to California to do it, but if you're a serial killer or something, maybe you might consider going to another state and doing it because you know that there's less likely of a chance you getting in trouble for it.
Well, look, you're absolutely right. And when you go back through history, the idea of attaching consequences to negative behavior, they figured this out in the time of Hammurabi with the cuneiform first written language. I mean, there's a penal code in there where they talk about consequences for actions, and the ancient Greeks talk about it, and the ancient Romans talk about it. And we're in this weird phase where it's almost like historical arrogance. We think that because we've advanced so much technologically, and we figured out DNA, and we can do Zoom interviews like this, that we have some corner on human behavior. And the bottom line is, when you remove consequences from actions like that, you're absolutely right. People put it in the calculus, and they're like, well, I'm going to go rob that jewelry store because the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to get probation. And it's a calculation, and it's absolutely a calculation for serial killers, and they ponder the consequences. And they think about things like, am I in a state that is actually going to execute me? That is something that factors into the decision making when you're talking about those types of murderers. And you couldn't be more right. And look, there's people forget about this, that this is a social compact, because if you go to countries where there isn't a functioning justice system, what happens is it's not just that killers just get away with it and and that's the end of it. What happens is the families of the victims, it is on them to get justice. And that's what we saw with the vendettas of Italy, around the turn of the century, where there was no real functioning justice system, and the families had to avenge their own murders. And you had entire villages emptied of men because it went tit for tat, where these different communities and these different little towns were killing each other because they were seeking justice on behalf of their loved one. It is a really bad formula, and everybody's forgotten that that's a part of the deal. And I've got families, I can tell you right now, that we caught the bad guy, we held him accountable, we got him in state prison. I've had a few where there were men in that family. If you murder somebody's daughter, you rape and murder somebody's daughter, or you kill their son in a drug deal, or whatever it may be, that they absolutely would have taken justice out themselves if it wasn't for this social contract of, the state is going to do this so you don't have to. And it means there's less violence in the communities, there's less pressure, and those poor victims shouldn't have to worry about that. And people like George Gascon have forgotten all about that. And look, I think that's what's happening in South Side Chicago right now. I think that the community and the policing and the community, the justice system has failed those communities. I think they have a 17% clearance rate, and that of their homicides in South Chicago. And that's a clearance for them is an arrest. It's not even a conviction. So once they make an arrest, they count that as cleared. So what is that? You get a 90% chance of getting away with a homicide in South Chicago. And if your loved one is murdered by some thug or by somebody, and you know who it is, and they're getting away with it, that causes them to seek justice, or their friends to seek justice. And that's a mess. And that is the road that, unless good people like your listeners, or people that attend CrimeCon, or people that care, wake up to that. I grew up in LA, and I really worry about that. And I think the homicide rate is going to go, I think it's going to go way up unless there's some changes.
Well, I would just like to state for the record that if anyone ever hurt my children and the justice system didn't do anything about it, I 100% would take matters into my own hands. And I think that a lot of people would say that. You know what I mean? So it is a
Yeah.
really horrible road to go down. And I never thought about that with what's going on in Chicago until you just said that. But that totally makes sense, that they're just seeking out revenge. And it's when I was at the medical examiner's office in Philly, we have similar things going on here, just not on that level. But I would do autopsies on like an 18-year-old kid that had 5 names RIP on his hand or on his arm tattooed, and and just be like, how are all these people that know each other like getting killed like this and stuff? It's just so it's like a terrible road to go down, you know?
Right. If it wasn't for people doing your job, I wouldn't have been able to do mine. Like you're truly like the behind the scenes heroes of homicides and homicide prosecutions truly are the people that are putting in the forensic work.
I feel like at the medical examiner's office, especially those people doing autopsies, they just are extra special people because it's a lot to just see people getting murdered every single day of your life, and it's not it doesn't look pretty. It's devastating to see. It's children. It's all different things, and you hear horrible stories every day. And it's just I feel like it's very. When I did my internship there, it was very emotionally heavy for me, and to be able to do that every single day of your life is very admirable. So, um,
Sure as
I
they
definitely
are
want to say
special
that.
people. Yeah, but
So,
you put your time in. You definitely did.
yeah, for sure. So, one question I have for you, this is kind of a weird question, I guess, but have you ever you meet these criminals and I'm assuming that some of them are you would think, and this is kind of a weird way to say this, but they're very intelligent, the way that they carry out the crime and the time they put into it and the obsession they have with it. Do you ever sit there and think like, wow, if this person used this kind of this mind to do something good for the world, they could be like the next Steve Jobs or something if they put this effort into a positive project instead of trying to murder people.
100%. You know, especially the conspiracies to commit murder for money. The amount of time that they spend putting these plots together, it's like, dude, you could write a screenplay and probably sell it. It's so elaborate, you know. But that's one of the interesting things about, you know, somebody that is willing to murder somebody for money. They tend to be into shortcuts. You know, they don't want to put in. They want to exercise their big brain and not necessarily work. You know, I had a couple of cases like that where there were, in fact, I had a few where it's like if only you had had the discipline to go through school, you could be running a corporation with that brain, and a lot of it really is very clever. The lucky for me, the guys I worked with, the men and women that the detectives that I got to work with were usually smarter than the bad guys we were going after. And yeah, absolutely, it's one of the tragic things about murder cases in general because when you when you break it down, like what they want, it's like in a domestic violence, like you want to get back together a lot of times, or they're losing control, the person's cheating, and killing them isn't a good part of that plan. Like if that's the goal, taking them off the planet is not a good way to get there. Like it's so much of it is self-defeating, you know. And there's a one of the cases I talk about in the book is my Daniel Wozniak case, and that was when you break down the plan that this guy enacted. He did not need like murdering a second person that he used as a decoy to throw the police off the scent of the first murder was the dumbest thing that he could have done when you break down the plan. And I talk about that in the book, but 100, you know, they are, my old investigator, Larry Montgomery, put it very well. He said, you know, when you untangle one of these murder cases, he said they always expect their first plan to work. And he said they roll the dice more so than they play chess. So they're not thinking 3 and 4 moves down the line. Like if this doesn't work, they're not building in redundancies. They tend to hope, you know, this, you know, you're going to say this and I'm going to say this, and then the cops are going to believe this, and then they go and do it. And Mike Tyson has a great quote, the great philosopher Mike Tyson, right? It's everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah, that's
And
my husband's favorite quote. He says it all
yeah,
the time.
yeah, right. And that applies with murders, you know, when they plan a murder, life happens and the car pulls into the parking lot that they're not expecting, or the phone rings at the wrong time. There's always stuff that happens that impacts that plan. And you know, when you've got a decent bunch of detectives with a little bit of resources and support from their agencies, and especially if they're working with a prosecutor who has some experience, those cases will get solved more often than not. And you know, it sounds corny to say, but the good guys will win those if they do the right things. So
Well, I think the investigating crimes or just pathology, autopsies, anything like that, you have to have somewhat of like a sick brain to think like what would these people do? But then you don't go further and actually do anything about it, but you can kind of think on their level, like how they're doing it, and but you're a decent person. You're not you're not really a
Well,
serial killer, you know.
the best detectives and the best prosecutors are all a little obsessive and they know the dark. You know what I mean? Like the best cops are always the one that probably like had a point in his young life or her young life where they could have gone the other way and decided that they were going to
Yeah,
truth,
exactly.
justice, in the American way versus going bad. Those are the ones. Same thing with trial work. The best trial lawyers tend to be the ones that were hung over when they took the bar. You know, like the ones that live life, that that are from the real world, not academia so much, but the ones that can look a blue collar jury in the eye and understand what they're listening for and what they want to hear. Those are the toughest people always to try a case against because they get it. You know.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks so much for being here today. It was awesome talking with you.
Oh, I had a blast. I had a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.